Okay, hello everybody. This is Helene Knott, and this is another installment of what I hope to be a series of tutorials on embroidery that I'm doing. And in particular, what I want to do with my tutorials is I have noticed that with other tutorials I watch, sometimes they lack focusing on certain details that I've learned over years of teaching or questions students may have that I think will make the experience better for you. So my hope is that I can include some tips and recommendations for products that I like that will make this a far more efficient, pleasurable experience for you. So today what I'm going to focus on is blanket stitching that goes around the edges of applique pieces, and this would be used for wool applique, or in this case I'm using felt because wool is so expensive. And as a sideline, I also want to point out that I am not enamored of these colors. I have saved my really nice felt for my actual projects, and I've picked colors that I don't care for that much just to show you, and likewise chose a thread color that I would probably not normally use, but it's because it'll provide better visibility for you to see what I'm doing. First, I want to describe the difference between a blanket stitch and a buttonhole stitch because they're essentially the same stitch. But with a buttonhole stitch, the stitches are close together enough that you do not see fabric between them. The blanket stitch leaves some spaces, but I'll get into that more when I start demonstrating. First, I want to talk about some tools here. And to start with, I want to talk about the needles. It's essential that you have sharp needles with eyes that are large enough to accommodate the thread that you're planning to use. There are several different brands out there. Crewel embroidery needles are fine, but I have found some of the cheaper brands will not have very large eyes. So my favorite happens to be the ones made by DMC. I also like to buy the packages in assorted sizes when possible because that gives me several different sizes of needles to try if I'm having trouble getting one or another size through the fabric. I like the size of their eyes, and they're really nice, well-made, sharp needles. But there are other brands as well. Tulip makes wonderful, albeit expensive needles, and Bohin, the French company, has crewel embroidery needles that are very nice. But don't skimp on the needle. Buy good quality, sharp embroidery needles. Stay away from tapestry needles. They are blunt. They're not meant for this kind of applique. They're meant for doing cross stitch or working on canvas work. Next, I want to address the thread. Buy good quality thread. In a recent spate of classes that I've been doing through the public library, to save them money because they buy the supplies, we buy our thread online. It's just a learning experience for students, but especially if you're going to do embroidery that you want to last, don't buy cheap thread. It's not manufactured that well. I have found that DMC is one of my favorite threads, and they come in a huge range of colors. And then my other favorite is a company called Cosmo that is made in Japan by a fabric company called Lesienne. Both of those are really good quality embroidery thread, and they come in 6-strand, which is what I'm going to use today to demonstrate. Now, one of the things I like about the DMC brand that you will find is when you look at these two little sleeves they put on the thread to keep the skein together. The one that's wider, there's some symbols down here, and one in particular is a little circle with an arrow, and what that is referring to is you'll have a raw end at either end of the skein, but if you pull the raw end at the end that has that little circle, the thread feeds through and unspools very evenly, which is a wonderful benefit because if you try to go the other way, it all gets tangled. Now, another tool I want to show you here is the scissors I like to use. These are made by Karen K. Buckley. They come in several sizes, and they are actually designed for wool appliqueurs because the jaws are very, very slightly serrated. That makes them grip the wool or the felt with greater accuracy. Otherwise, when you try to snip, the wool and felt wants to kind of scoot away from you, but these are great. But any sharp, short-jawed pair of embroidery scissors are great. I also like ones with big loops because if you get the ones with the tight loops, they make your fingers sore after a while. And I want to show you another tool here because the next step is to separate the thread. Some people use all 6 strands, and that's wonderful if you want it to be very visible and a design element in your applique. But if what you're going for is just a little securing stitch at the edge, you want to separate your threads. And a lot of wool appliqueurs will work with 2 threads or 3 threads instead of all 6. I want to show you this really gorgeous little nifty thread separator that's made by a company called Puffin and Company. They do needle minders, threaders, all sorts of accessories for embroidery. And the way this one works is you take the alligator clip end of it and you clamp your thread in it. That will suspend it. And then when you take the thread to separate it, don't start at the very end. You're likely to get it tangled if you do. Work your way about an inch down. I'm going to separate this into 3 strands. Pull it apart like that. And then you suspend this. And as you pull, the fulcrum action separates your thread. It's a nice, nifty tool. It is kind of spendy, but if you want to treat yourself, it's a wonderful tool to get. There is another way of separating your thread by hand, and this is the way that I'm actually more likely to do. You want to work with the length of thread you want. Most embroidery books will tell you try not to work with more than about 18 or 20 inches because otherwise the thread can get tangled on you. But I don't always follow the rules. So in my case, I usually don't like running out of thread. I will pull off what is in essence an arm's length and then clip it with my scissors. And just for a moment's digression, I want to show you this little scissors case I got. I bought it at a Japanese garden gift shop many years ago because it's the perfect size to be a scissors case, and you can stick needles in there too. Originally, it had googly eyes that fell out after a few years, and rather than have just 2 holes there, I made my cat into a little sleepy cat. Okay, so enough about scissors cases and cats. Let's go back to the tutorial here on how to do the blanket stitch. I'm going to show you how to divide the thread by hand because this is actually the way I'm more likely to do it in a class rather than drag my fancy thread separator. So I find that wrapping it around your finger a few times and pulling it like this helps smooth out and straighten out those twists to where they're not going to get caught up as easily and interfere with the separation. Don't try to separate the thread up at the tip because you're likely to get it tangled. Move your way about an inch down and pull it apart into the number of strands you want. I'm going to separate this one into 3 strands. Grab one end of that 3 strands in your fingers like this. Hold the other one between your thumb and forefinger like this to create a V shape. And now what you're going to do is use the finger of the other hand, and you're going to pull and do so slowly, controlling the thread as it comes off down there until you separate it into two pieces. That is the way I like to separate my thread. Okay, so we're going to use my shorter DMC embroidery needle here. And I do the old-fashioned lick the thread, flatten it, and push it through the eye. But here's another tip. Sometimes when you go to thread it, it repels the thread. This time I got it right. But if you find that trying to thread, it keeps resisting, what you want to do is rotate your needle to the other side, because needle eyes are punched. That means they're smooth on one side and there is oftentimes rough burrs on the other side that the manufacturers try to polish out, but they don't always get it just perfect. So very often the solution, if you're having trouble threading a needle, is to spin it and go at the eye from the other side. Okay, so we're going to do a little knot on the end. You can do whatever knot you've learned to do in the past, but I like to do a quilter's knot, where you grab the thread. I have another tutorial on this, and I wind it around several times and pull it through. This is, in essence, creating a French knot in thin air is what you're doing, and it gives a nice, neat knot down at the bottom. Okay, moving back to the scenario, I'm going to show you two shapes today. One of them is a circuitous shape where I'm going to want to stitch around the entire shape and rejoin my stitching, and that requires a different starting method than if you are doing a line where it starts on one side and ends on the other. Let's say, for example, you are doing an little landscape wool applique where your mountain goes from one side to the other here, and you'll start here and finish here. You're going to take your needle and thread and bring your first stitch up through just the background felt or wool, not through the pink there. Pull it through. And now your very first stitch is going to be like treading water. You have to decide how deep your stitches are going to be and how far apart. If you recall earlier, I mentioned that a buttonhole stitch has compact, tensely packed stitches that create a solid line, whereas a blanket stitch, you'll see spacing between it, and how much space you want to leave is entirely up to you. So your first stitch is literally going to be in one place, like that. And now I want to show you another thing that I have seen students doing that makes it less efficient. A lot of times they don't pay attention to where the remainder of their thread is, and they'll concentrate on creating their next stitch, which I've moved over, in my case here, just a little more than 1/8 of an inch. But the problem with doing it this way is if I pulled it tight, I would just get an angled stitch. You need this stitch to wrap under the needle. And by doing it the way I just showed you, that was a two-step process. It wastes time and it's not efficient. So if you are a right-handed embroiderer, you'll want to work from the left towards the right with the blanket stitch. If you are left-handed, it's just the opposite. But what I do is I secure the thread with my thumb like this and make sure it loops over the top. In this manner, when I take my next stitch like this, the loop is already positioned there behind the needle. And by repeating this, it lessens how much physical activity you need to create these stitches. Now, another tip about getting these nicely configured is when you first pull it through, pull up and then pull to the right. That helps define that little upside down L shape that you are creating with this stitch. As with any task that you're teaching yourself to do, there's a lot of muscle memory that comes into play here. And if you repetitively do something like this, it doesn't take all that long before your hands know what to do and you don't have to concentrate or think so much about doing it. And that makes a project like wool applique a great, what I call a Netflix project. Put on something you want to binge and just start stitching away. And you don't need to put as much focus on the actual stitching you're doing because your hands have already been trained to go in the direction you want to do. Now I need to just make it to the end here, and I will show you how to tie off your thread at the end. Okay, we are approaching the end here. And when you're ready to take your last stitch, what you're going to do is come up like you were before, like that, secure it nicely. And now you're going to take your needle to the back of the work. Do not lose this loop that you are securing with this thread. Go to the far side of it here so that it actually tacks that stitch in place. And now you can turn around the work. Some people like to do a little knot on the back. Other people like to do some back stitching or weave it through the threads. Really, the choice is yours, what you want to do. Just make sure that the thread that you're weaving through isn't going to show up on the front of your work. Sometimes I do each of them, so it's not that important. Just make sure that it's secure so your embroidery does not come undone. And then you can clip your thread, and there you have it. Your nice embroidered, rather appliqued piece of felt here. Okay, moving on to the scenario where you're going to be appliquing a continuous stitch shape. I'm going to start with a fresh piece of thread here so that hopefully it's long enough that it'll go all the way around without changing. I will thread my needle again here. There we go. Okay. What I'm going to cover in this particular tutorial for this are a couple of factors. One is how to start and go around and how to seamlessly rejoin so that it doesn't look like you can spot the starting and ending points. And then the other thing that I am going to do is show you how to handle sharp corners going around it with a blanket stitch, because that's another issue that came up recently at a class I was teaching where someone said, could you please show me how to go around a point? So in this case here, I'm actually going to start in the middle of a straight run because it's going to be easier for me to connect when I come back around with this straight stitch here, with the straight edge. And this time I'm actually coming up through the pink here. And instead of doing a stitch that comes straight up here, I am going to start with my first stitch over to the edge like this. See how I have a little angled stitch? Well, when I come back around, I'm going to snag that stitch and straighten it. So continue doing your blanket stitching as I showed you before, making sure that that loop is always up behind the needle. And as you approach a corner that you want to make sharply defined, start paying attention to how far apart your stitches are, because when you get to that corner, you are going to create what is commonly called a crow's foot. And I'll show you why they call it that in a minute. Okay, I'm going to do one more regular stitch here. And here's my next stitch. I am going to insert the needle where it's the same distance here from this side as it is from this side equally, but the first stitch is going to go the same direction they have been going, like this. The next stitch is going to go into the same exact hole, but this time you angle the needle so you're coming out right at the point here, like that. Pull it. Don't pull it so tight that it distorts. And the third stitch, same hole again, but this time you're coming over to this side here and pull that, and see that little three-pointed edge? That's why they call it crow's foot. It looks like a crow foot. And now you're going to keep on going down the next straight edge, and so on and so forth. Handle each of the corners that you come to the same way that I showed you with that crow's foot. And I will be showing you how to tack down the final stitch in just a moment here. Okay, the inevitable has happened. I have run out of thread. I'm not going to have enough to complete this. So I want to show you how to seamlessly join a new piece of thread without it being apparent where you ran out and where you started up again. Now, I caution you to do this when you still have enough thread left on your needle there that you have enough to tuck away or tie off or whatever. Don't wait until you're out of thread, because then there's no good way to secure it. Much as I showed you earlier how you tack down the end of the mountain, you're going to come to the corner here off the stitch to secure it like that, so you have a nicely defined little leg of your buttonhole there. And now I'm going to back stitch. I apologize. The other piece of the felt I had a stabilizer on the back. This is harder for you to see color-wise, but basically what I'm doing is taking little back stitches through the existing stitches. After I've taken 3 or 4, I feel I can easily clip off the thread. And now I'm going to find a piece that's definitely long enough. I don't want to run out of thread again before I'm done with this. I'm going to thread my needle here, tie another little knot like I showed you in the first place there. Okay. So this part's important. Where you want to come up and start is just inside that little L shape where you tacked down that corner. Make sure it's on the inside there, not on the far side. And from this point on, you continue just as you have before, because that looks exactly like you had never run out of thread to begin with. Nice, compact, neat join there where you don't see that you definitely ran out and started up again. And that's the beauty of the blanket stitches. It actually allows you to do that. So I'm going to continue here until we get to the end, and then I will resume the little verbal lesson on how you connect. Okay, back to the lesson now. As you're approaching your starting point, visually try to gauge how many stitches you are going to need to put in there so the spacing looks more or less consistent. We are not computers. It won't ever be absolutely perfect, but for instance here I can put 1 stitch in the middle between these two. It's a little larger gap than before, or I can try to squeeze 3 stitches in, and that's a judgment call. I think I'm just going to go for the 1 stitch, especially since I'm running low on thread again. So this is my final stitch there, that is the one that I'm going to create going through the pink. Now what I'm going to do is come and snag this loop from the first time and grab it here and pull it to where it does that. It pulled it out so that it snagged there, and now it looks just like the rest of the stitches. It's no longer angled. And that is the best way I have found to circuitously go around a shape and rejoin your stitching in the end. And now for this one, like before, we're just going to tie it off. Maybe at some point in the future I'll show you how to do a little in-place knot. But for now, I'm just going to do 3 back stitches through existing stitches visible on the back. And there we have it. there is your circuitous, an entire shape, and it doesn't matter what the shape is. The only thing to pay attention to is if you have sharp corners, remember to do those crow's foot stitches because they make the definition of your corners much better. Thank you so much for watching, and keep tuned for more tutorials. I hope to start doing more of them and try to interject with each one those little pointers that I hope will make embroidery more efficient for you and more pleasurable. Thanks, and have a great day stitching.